Prof's Namyong Lee's commentary, long, Complaints and Criminal Accusations Save People's Livelihoods. The state must fund the Committee for the People's Livelihood. Corruption is a structure that steadily erodes everyday life. The primary force collapsing people's livelihoods in the Republic of Korea is not economic slowdown, but corruption. Corruption leaks tax money, distorts policy, tears apart fair competition, drives companies away, and cuts off the ladder of opportunity for the young. In the end, the pain ordinary citizens feel in prices, housing, and jobs often begins not with market failure, but with institutional failure. Korea was assessed at 64 points and around 30th out of 180 countries in the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index. This is not a situation where a 1 or 2 point change can be treated as success. It is a phase that demands dense structural devices to reduce the cost of corruption. The core problem is that corruption is seen only as isolated cases and not as a system. A case may end with an investigation, but a system repeats into the next generation. What breaks that repetition is a virtuous cycle of constant monitoring, constant reporting, and outcomes being absorbed into formal state procedures. The rise of a civic audit function in the form of the Committee for the People's Livelihood is therefore worth close attention. The fact that the committee, led by Secretary-General Kim Soon-hwan, has for many years sustained complaints, criminal accusations, and issue-raising across diverse fields means that civil society is filling gaps left by the state's monitoring apparatus. The key stakeholder groups are the public and taxpayers, insider groups that gain from corruption, the government and public institutions that must supervise them, investigative and judicial institutions, and civil society that organizes monitoring and reporting. The greater the imbalance of power among these groups, the more quietly corruption succeeds, and the more severely livelihoods collapse. The committee's complaints and criminal accusations are not a mere release of anger. They function as input signals that make the state operate. Investigative agencies do not invent criminal suspicion on their own. The system begins to move the moment someone organizes documents and facts, files them, turns them into a case, and ensures formal assignment. Any organization that performs this role consistently functions in practice as an external audit capability for society. In particular, the volunteer work of those involved, including Secretary-General Kim, is crucial from a cost structure standpoint. If the state attempted to perform an equivalent level of monitoring, intake, and fact verification through internal manpower, labor, and operating costs would balloon first. Recognizing that civil volunteerism reduces public cost, and then institutionalizing that function is a rational direction. If one wants to evaluate complaint and accusation performance in numbers, one must first clarify what is being measured. To present the committee's cumulative accusations as a single official number, the organization would need to publish an audited annual report, or investigative agencies would need to publicly classify and disclose statistics by cases filed by a specific organization. In reality, that rarely happens. Therefore, when using public information, analysis should begin with a minimum confirmed count approach. That means compiling, by year, cases that can be verified through public reporting and through confirmed assignment or investigation schedules, establishing a conservative lower bound, and then assessing impact by separating it into investigative initiation, compulsory measures, disposition outcomes, and resulting institutional reform debates. Even within the range verifiable through public reporting, the committee's filings in 2024-2025 entered formal procedures in multiple instances, including reception, assignment, and complainant questioning. The complaint related to the SKT hacking response controversy proceeded to police questioning of the complainant, and filings related to the National Election Commission also entered investigative steps. The key point, however, is not the number of cases alone. In domains where potential harm is massive, such as electoral trust, personal information and communications security, and senior public ethics, one accusation can reduce risks affecting millions. Performance evaluation should therefore weigh not only case counts, but also the scale of the targeted risk and the degree to which the filing actually triggered state action. Consider the major publicly observable examples and their ripple effects. One core example is the filing alleging abuse of authority or dereliction of duty regarding accountability in election administration against relevant officials. Electoral trust is democratic infrastructure, and the collapse of infrastructure leads directly to the collapse of livelihoods. Such filings, regardless of political advantage or disadvantage, function to connect institutional accountability to investigation and audit. Another example is in the communications infrastructure domain. In relation to the SKT hacking incident, the committee filed on the basis of alleged delayed executive response and possible legal violations, and police proceeded with complainant questioning. Personal data and communications networks are now everyday infrastructure at the same level as national security. The moment security investment and incident response are left solely to private discretion, the public inevitably bears the damage. In matters involving senior officials and political circles as well, the committee has continued multiple filings, and in some cases the process has advanced to the stage of complainant questioning. When a filing related to a high-impact controversy, such as a large-scale development scandal, enters formal procedure, an environment is created in which investigative agencies find it more difficult to evade accountability. There is a monitoring gap and a cost burden the national system consistently misses. Government does have dedicated anti-corruption bodies, integrity assessments, and reporting channels. Yet the reason perceived corruption does not fall commensurately is the time lag between monitoring and sanction and the dispersion of monitoring targets. If a system exists but collapses into fizzling out before citizens can experience results, it is effectively no system at all. Public sector corruption reports have been disclosed as totaling roughly 98,000 cumulative submissions since 2002. A high volume of reporting indicates that abnormal practices repeat on the ground, and it also signals that the state cannot preemptively monitor every site directly. In the end, civil reporting and civil monitoring organizations become essential inputs for public justice. This is precisely why state budget support is necessary and why international standards support such a direction. The global community does not treat anti-corruption as a moral lecture. It demands that states build prevention systems, expand access to reporting, make risk management, internal controls, and auditing function continuously and ensure that citizens can report safely. Partnership with civil society is not peripheral. It is part of institutional design. Domestic institutional pathways are also open. The Act on Support for Non-Profit Private Organizations provides for administrative and financial support to non-profit organizations engaged in public interest activities, with support procedures that can be operated through open competition, screening, and ex-post evaluation. If the principles of budgeting, grant allocation, execution, settlement, and clawback are applied within the framework of the National Subsidy Management Regime, providing budget support for anti-corruption public interest projects is institutionally feasible. What is needed is a design that supports without taming, a design of institutions, budget, and evaluation. Budget support must never become hush money. If independence is compromised, the monitoring function dies. Therefore, support should not be a blank check for general operating expenses. It should be structured around public interest projects that strengthen case-building capacity. Programs should be designed around clear outputs such as standardization of filing documentation, evidence preservation systems, legal support, digital forensics advisory, victim linkage, and publication of institutional reform reports. Evaluation must be done through indicators, not emotion. The minimum indicators should include the number of filings received, the number of cases assigned by investigative agencies, the number of complainant questioning proceedings, the distribution of outcomes, the number of institutional reforms reflected, and tangible linkage to relief for public harm. If weights are added for the size of targeted risk, the model prevents a shallow many cases approach and instead prioritizes corruption with large social impact. Audit and transparency requirements must be stronger, not weaker. Accounting should be subject to external audit or designated audit. Project outputs should be disclosed as a principle. Conflict of interest prevention pledges, bans on lobbying, and strict separation from financial relationships with case-related parties should be mandatory. If even a fraction of public funds is mishandled, anti-corruption's legitimacy immediately becomes an attack point for corruption itself. If the public does not change, corruption will win. What fuels corruption is not only corrupt power holders, but also a majority that looks away because it is inconvenient. Ignorance and indifference are corruption's fuel, and greed is corruption's excuse. Civil complaints and accusations are the work of being criticized on behalf of power, assembling documentation through the night on behalf of citizens, and absorbing risk on behalf of society. Organizations like the Committee for the People's Livelihood must not be dismissed as political noise. They should be read as a warning that the state's monitoring function is leaving empty spaces. The state must respect the committee's independent function, support it with budget and institutional channels, and grow it through even stricter transparency and performance evaluation. Saving a corrupted country is not achieved through grand slogans. It is achieved by repeatedly ensuring that the committee's filings are received, assigned, investigated, disposed of, and converted into institutional correction. Making that engine run on the side of ordinary citizens is the state's responsibility. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, Long